I would like you to perhaps elaborate a little bit more on this idea that of capitalism being such an inefficient system of production because of the competition between brands and in my naive knowledge and in theory, my understanding has been that competition increases efficiency.
You would think so,
right?
Yeah.
And yet when I hear you, it makes sense. But I would like, if you would, can you somehow reconcile these two pictures? Is that the kind of...
Yes, that's exactly what I meant.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other points, Philip?
Yeah, well, thank you for your presentation. I think I wrote down in the beginning that inequality increases labor supply.
Yes.
And I didn't really understand that. So maybe you give me a little, not too lengthy explanation.
Okay. Can I do this on the chart? This is very easy. A decent supply curve is like this, right? That is the price and that is the quantity. And the higher the price is, the more you put in the market. The labor supply curve deviates in two important aspects from this. If the price, that is the wage, right, what you get in the market, increases, then people at the upper end, that is of lesser importance for my argument here, prefer free time over wage, because wage is already very high. They opt for free time and withdraw part of that. More important is, much bigger, is this effect. And this is why it's called inverted S, right? And this means the lower the wages are, the stronger people want to increase their household income, not through strikes or other attempts to increase their wages, which is very often hopeless, but they have to send additional members of the household into the market, or they work additional hours. These are the two options, which means inequality with a greater proportion of people in the lower wage ranks will increase their need to earn income, that is, their preparedness to show up on the supply side of the labor market. Is that clear? Okay.
Elena's question about the efficiency of capital.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, this is an old argument. In a normal American and many European cities, in the main roads leading to the next highway, you see on every corner 4 gas stations. All these gas stations are working most of the time way below capacity. They could serve 100 cars per hour. They do serve 25 at most. And altogether, all the 4 on each corner of the intersection would serve 100. However, that would be a monopolistic situation, which would allow the monopolist to raise the price. In order to prevent that, you have to have this competitive situation. However, the cost for empty capacity, I mean, all the staff, all the investments, is dumped on the consumer. Gas could be much cheaper if we had monopoly control or price setting, plus full capacity utilization. And most items that we consume are filled with excess capacities, automobiles being the standard example, 1.7 people in the car with 5 seats, and the rest is optionality. You know, in case there is a need that I meet some friends who want a ride with me, then I need the full capacity. But it is very rare. Another example, also relating to the automobile, which is the ideal quintessential consumer item, cars are being used, that is in motion, for 1 hour on average per 24 hours. 23 hours they lose their market value while rusting on the parking lot, right? This is the excess capacity. A positive example is the debate, which has now a bit faded, but maybe worth reactivating, on appropriate technologies in third world countries, for instance. So the debate was, we need a car, for instance, in rural districts of Namibia. We need a car that has the following qualities. It is cheap and affordable. And there is no comfort in it. There is no status signal in it. It is neutral, mass-produced. All the economies of scale are available. It is slow, no more than 40 miles on paved ground, and also workable on places where there is no full pavement. It is very important, user serviceable, and it lasts for at least 20 years. And it is designed to transport both persons and goods safely, right? This is the ideal car. You would think this is one of the hottest items on the market. It is impossible on the market because there is not enough place for excess capacity or junk to be built in it. It is exactly tailored to the needs of potential consumers, counting by the hundreds of millions. But it is absent. You do not find it in the market. Another example, if you ever come to Rome, go to the Contemporary Art Museum. There is a item that construction, very ingenious construction of producing drinkable water in arid environments, such as Sahara and Sub-Sahara Africa. And the idea is to build a net that's on which during nighttime condensates the humidity of the air and drops down into a vessel, 50 liter per this, all made of local materials. It is also commercially impractical because, again, it's too useful, right? Too little junk in it, and it's also aesthetically very attractive. And so there are examples of goods that are nothing but use value without identity signals or surplus capacity or built-in obsolescence or symbolic obsolescence. So they are very rare. For all the rest, we have to pay, right? And that is part of the revulsion of consumers against these tremendously expensive campaigns for sports shoes, right? That's one of them started here at MIT. I mean, they're exactly the same use value, the three leading manufacturers, but they are competing, and the costs of competition are 30 or 40% of the product value, right? Plus the profit, but the cost of is what makes it so expensive to buy. And consumers begin to understand, households begin, and the movements begin to understand that this is a cost that is problematic and we can somehow bypass, right?
Why don't we take a few more questions? Yes.
Thanks again for being here and sharing your point of view. In a lot of the conclusions and solutions, innovations that you presented, social capital or a need for more social capital seems to be woven in them. I was wondering if there's been research done on ways to cultivate that? Can it be cultivated? I mean, developing reciprocity and trust takes work, and can that be done from a private standpoint, or does it have to develop locally?
Let me take one more.
Yeah.
James.
Mine actually relates, I think, at least one of my points does. In your description of the sharing economy and your optimism about it, the third, I guess, driving force that you mentioned is kind of a cultural shift of values and underlying motivations. And that is, you didn't mention it, and I realize you have very limited time, but in any of the others. And when I think of your third institutional innovation, work time reduction, and in your article that was circulated, a key point you made is the inability to save it as a almost an undermining feature of its value. I guess my two questions are, if one thinks about this deep underlying cultural shift, then it seems to me that all of these could be powerful if it was emphasized. And on the time issue, I guess I'm just not understanding why the lack of ability to save it, and in your terminology, extend a weekend, undermines its value. It seems to me if you work an hour less every day, you have that hour with family or friends or recreation or whatever. I do get your point that one needs some financial resources often to use that time in an enjoyable or productive way, but those are my two questions.
Okay.
You know, these questions are complicated enough. I'm going to get those two out, and then I'll come to you next.
Okay. I think social capital, I've been from the beginning very interested in the discussion with Bob Putnam on social capital, and the misleading title I have in the critical comment on his work written and in a debate with him developed. The misleading analogy is capital is the result of investment. Social capital, who invests in social capital? It is simply there. And if it is not there, Putnam and his research group that made this magnificent 1993 book, they can only answer, sorry, you have the wrong history. Right? History has not helped you develop this culture of local republicanism and contribution to the common good and so on. So how can it be nurtured, social capital? That is the biggest question of all in a way. But if you see where it emerges and where it does not, it has to do with homogeneity, recognition of people as similar to themselves. Other people are, and the two basic determinants of human existence, gender and age, do play a role. It comes in generations and often in gender separate settings. But from there you can go beyond that, and there are examples where people who live next to each other, belong to one neighborhood, without having any contact, develop such contact under the expectation of the neighbors will be around 5 years from now or longer. They will remember that we have interacted, and interaction solidifies by recollection, right? You have helped me in this, so I cannot but feel an obligation to help you in this affair, right? This evolving reciprocities under the assumption of sameness, our neighborhood is something. So that is a great tradition. since as we know since Tocqueville in America, in the United States, and I mean it works in parts of Italy, as we have seen, and in others it doesn't, for reasons that seem to be unsurmountable. That you cannot do anything about this. So it's all an empirical question. The empirical question is also on time. Okay, I mean the strongest empirical foundation I have for, well, not all I said, but is this particular point. We did a survey, large survey in the late 80s on whether workers would prefer being rewarded or remunerated in time rather than money. And the overwhelming answer is in money. And for exactly these reasons, these three reasons. One, as I said, okay, time is uneven in its lived experience, right? 1 hour on Tuesday morning is worth a fraction of 1 hour on Saturday afternoon, because the rhythm of how our time is divided. As you cannot put the hour on Tuesday morning on Saturday afternoon, this stickiness of time or rigidity makes it less attractive. Second, in order to make it enjoyable, you need money to spend the time. And maybe we can overcome that, but that is the current reality. And the third argument among the people we have surveyed and interviewed was the argument, if we succeed in shortening work time, then the workload will be the same, but we have less time for it, right? It will be compressed into a faster rhythm of work, and so we are defenseless against this managerial response to work time reduction. This is, I'm still very much for it, but the high point was in the French and German campaigns in the 80s, and it rapidly declined, and we are basically back to the 40 hours week or something close, coming close to it, with much more flexibility, but flexibility dictated by the employer side and not by the employee side. Time sovereignty, as the term was at the is not realized. Time sovereignty of the employer has been, and yeah, I think that was
the other thing was the deep value or cultural changes associated with your first point in terms of the sharing economy seems to be less emphasized than the other, including on the time issue, by the way.
Yeah.
The first point, time versus money, that's a cultural issue.
Okay, you need to, I mean, I mentioned briefly the trust, the awareness of risk. If I give someone my spare room, my son is at college, so someone has a room and can, well, whoever may come, and what do these people do with my equipment, and are they trustworthy, and is there any insurance? So it's also very much based upon trusting on cultural affinity and similarity, and I think it's an ingenious move of a city to say this is the place for trusting, right, and for overcoming all these obstacles, namely the city of Amsterdam, right? And they were simply the first ones to do it, and they had a good reputation for it. This is a city guide for Amsterdam on the sharing economy, if you want to circulate this.
So I'm going to get two more. First, Nick.
There's 3 points. A shared economy really requires the existence of an identifiable community. And it's very difficult to think about a community in a city of 15 million or Tokyo or Mexico City. So the idea of doing things for each other is okay on the village level, but I think it begins to disappear where the great concentrations of population are. Secondly, I mean, not mentioned, I think, the role of advertising, and to a person, the new economics, people have said you've got to rein in advertising because actually, they don't say it for this reason, but advertising has the power of transforming needs into wants. And nowhere is this more obvious than in the case of food and housing. It is the quality of food and nutritional value per dollar or euro spent is going down in order for people to buy that LCD television, in order to buy a second copy. This is a designed response. You know, in a time where we finally have recognized that there is the displacement of labor by technology, physical technology, and energy, the truth of the matter is we do not need, each firm does not need to have the labor it used to have. But the commons dilemma is that if everybody sheds labor, there is nobody left to buy the industrial product. And that's where I think...
That's basic income as an automated stabilizer.
The comment is that work is not just about purchasing power for consumption. Work used to have an independent meaning about... I mean, I like to work, and the more work I do, the better I like it. I'm not looking to cut my hours short, and I'm sure there are many people here who work a lot more than they're expected to work, because work is a mechanism of satisfaction which is psychic and not monetary. But if you turn all work into basically fueling a consumption machine, you've lost an opportunity to give satisfaction in your words of a very different kind than the consumption, because people will consume goods if their work is otherwise not satisfied.
Let me get one more and then we'll
I'd like to suggest that the problem may not be so much cultural change as subcultural change, that instead of trying to change the whole society in order to increase trust and recognition, it might be much easier to have a smaller locus where people know one another, where they're bound together by rules. One of the findings from the work democracy literature is that existing workplace is very difficult, but greenfield sites work well. And so what I am suggesting, which I'm actually involved in, is the generation of a community from scratch, which is bound together by a series of rules and ethical commitments, where people know one another face to face, and where it's constituted in such a way that the value that people get out of that community is greater than what they would have on the outside.
Okay, very interesting points and very central to the argument. Communities do not need to be local. Let me quote one, just for the matter of illustration and concreteness. One case I'm familiar with, so a middle-aged professional, self-employed, rents additional rooms for her apartment in order to have office space for her work, and separate within one house a rooftop little office room and her apartment. Okay, so also. Okay. Then she rents more space than she actually needs, trusting that she can create additional income through Airbnb to pay for the rent of this. So this is all calculated. Now comes in a couple from India. And they know each other through the same, sharing the same profession. So it's not local. They come from India, but then they live there for 3 months, and download some film through the internet, which is costly for the owner, right? And then there's a conflict that has to be settled. And given the the collegiality of the same profession, it's turned out to be quite easy to settle that. That they said, well, we did something wrong, we were unaware that this is costly. So it was a community, I mean, over continents, created by, general standards of civilized behavior, but also professional commonality, collegiality. That worked very well. Such frictions can be overcome. I think it's very important that you emphasize the intrinsic value. Sociologists say intrinsic. It's not just for income, it is because it's worth for itself doing something. It's enjoyable, although it may be demanding. I think most of us work this way. We enjoy what we are doing, right? And why can't we enjoy, and this Amsterdam mystique that is now being built works on this. Why can't we enjoy in the sharing economy what we are doing? Namely, providing opportunities to others, helping them, making income on the side, what economists call process utilities rather than outcome utilities. It is an enjoyable experience to interact with people whom I have never seen before, I'm not going to see again. Still we get along very nicely. This production may also be an answer to your question. The production of process utilities, a kind of superficial but still self-reproducing commonality of orientations, right? That is something that seems to be very self-sustaining in such contexts, as it is in the case of the barter economy or the parallel currencies or the voucher-driven currencies that we know from babysitting cooperatives. It is very egalitarian, 1 hour is 1 hour, and you have to earn the hour through your own babysitting before you can spend the hour, right? This is all vouchers-driven, one good economy, which creates, as the classical writers of economic liberalism predicted and postulated, a civic commonality among participants to this, not conflict, not mutual exploitation, not opportunism, but a spirit of republican virtue.
We're getting toward the end. I'm going to take 2 or 3 more. Sonia?
Thank you. I really enjoyed your everything that you said. My question goes back to the beginning when you had the household, the firm, and the state. And obviously, the way that capitalism works right now, when you talked about essentially planned obsolescence, that the consumer is never quite satisfied, there's addictive ploys, it seems as though the biggest part of all of this is taking on the contemporary model of capitalism. And I'm just wondering we can have cultural shifts for the consumer, but I'm wondering how does that part of how do we change from that productionist era?
I think the 3, may I? No.
One more.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed it a lot, I have to say. I have a few questions regarding, or more comment regarding the cultural change or the level of cultural change that we think we're seeing here, because I think we have to be a little careful looking at the sharing economy and the positive rhetoric that we're adopting around it. Because I think there are also a few critical questions that we need to ask before we all kind of jump on this bandwagon. I've spent the last few months looking at cases of the sharing economy when it comes to the consumption of fashion and clothing products. And I think especially in this case, I think we have to be rather critical towards the motives of consumers to adopting these practices, because obviously there are also those consumers who do this out of conviction that this will be benefiting the environment, will be a form of sustainable consumption, but there's also a large proportion of consumers who will do this because it will provide them with more means of consuming even more.
Rebound.
So yes, rebound effects, exactly. So I think it's also in terms of we very often conceptualize this as being disruptive or potentially cannibalizing traditional industries. And I think we have to be careful because I think there are still certain product areas, and I would say that clothing or fashion is definitely one of them, where there's a huge risk of rebound effects that ultimately this the increased amount of capital that is at our disposal that we get access to by renting out, swapping, reselling clothing we only wear once, we all of a sudden have the opportunity of consuming even more. So I think we have to be very careful in what direction we push this, and that we don't forget to still raise those critical questions.
Let me take those two.
Okay. 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 Again, very important and very much to the point questions. I mean, the ideal of the social scientist is to explain change endogenously and not through contingent external shocks. And I think that the turning point that I try to describe the symptoms of is that from a wider separation to the opposite movement of the two units, production and household. And it is endogenously driven by three things. One, by the rising levels of unemployment, precariousness, poverty, inequality, and the condition of physical need that is not longer a matter of the underclass. It is a matter of the middle class and the young generation in the middle class itself. No one really knows in his early or her early 20s what and where and at what material level he or she will live a year from now, right? This is the precariousness. No one knows what's going to happen, right? No career, no predictability, no security, and so this situation activates the search for alternatives. And the sharing economy is an outcome of this search for alternatives, for whatever it is good for. And I very much agree with your skeptical points. But let me come to that. Okay, there are in the sharing economies two big subfamilies. One is what is called P2P, peers-to-peers transactions outside of the market. And then you have, of course, the automobile enterprise in Germany. BMW runs the biggest car-sharing service, right? They know that their market is going away, therefore they create a new market. And also Airbnb is a business enterprise which is more successful than any of the hotel chains in Germany. Right? And I wanted to show the figures, but we could not solve the technical problem. I mean, it's annual growth rates of 170%. That is rare in any business, and both in the mobility sector and in the housing accommodation sector, this is to be found. There are new jobs created, but some jobs deserve to be killed. I mean, because they are nothing but junk, what they produce, and that is a noble process that can be neither stopped nor welcome. It is a fact of this type of economy we live in. Rebound effect, I'm not really worried about, because there are three institutional novelties that are not part of the normal institutional inventory of a capitalist economy. First, you get access without property or purchase or acquisition, right? You use an apartment, you use a car that does not belong to you, but someone else. Rental cars have been around for a long time, but this is a tiny segment of the mobility market. If that expands, and if this expands into the non-profit area, that is all for the better, and it may make mobility cheaper and cause a rebound effect. But it may also reduce our dependency on the automobile sector, which is 10 to 12% of the economy, right? So cars are used more fully than 1 hour in 24, maybe 2.5 hours in 24. This is an efficiency gain of a collective sort. And also, if this becomes a paradigm of transaction, then it is not just it's not just a monetary driven economy. Some of the transaction is driven by prices. Some is driven by ad hoc agreed prices, like in bazaars rather than markets, right? Some is driven by something like tips. In order to avoid taxes, someone takes you to some place where you have to be in his or her private car, and at the end you say, "But do I owe you?" It's your decision, right? It's not income, because then it would be taxable. It is just a donation, and also what is interesting and attractive, I think, is not just access without property and exchange without prices, but income without employment. You can increase your income, presumably your main income from a precarious employment situation, by sharing all kinds of resources you have, including food. I mean, you cook not for 1, 2, or 3 persons, you cook for 7, 8, or 10 persons, and tell your neighbor, "I'm doing this," and you can, next week you do the same, right? Reciprocity without market relation. This may be a helpful utilization or exploitation of the economic law of economies of scale within the household. And the households are not constrained by their often very small size. People can share. They can, in particular, and that is also something that is available in Amsterdam, you can teach other people how to help themselves. For instance, in the repair sector, in the car repair sector again, and they save a lot of money. I mean, a minority of people have or trust themselves sufficiently to change a tire of a car. I've forgotten the figures, but it's a tiny minority who would do that. You know, the industry does everything to make them fearful if they do that. But if you can show them how to do this and let them practice, it takes half an hour, and it adds to their income or decreases their expenditures, and can be so. The non-monetary or half-monetary aspect of this, trading with time rather than money, is also attractive. So I think the books are not yet closed on whether this is more beneficial or more detrimental, but I hope for the former, yeah. Okay. Also, what you earn really by the second-hand stores in clothing is not that great that you can finance a great rebound effect of this. You do not have to. Oh, you know more about this. I was first-hand experience in Berlin. Yeah.
I wouldn't
underestimate
the actual effect of what women spend on clothing and what others will be willing to still pay for a pair of what might be designer shoes. So there's quite amount of money and quite much volume clothing that is.
I'm told this is not the case in Berlin, where the second-hand clothing market is entirely a buyer's market. You know, most of the things that you want to sell are not accepted.
Yeah.
Sonia's question?
What remind me, please.
How you take on the fact
Oh, okay, of course, I have the, yeah. I try to answer that by saying endogenous change, right? And one has to do with precariousness, poverty, a strong economic incentive to engage in these practices. A second is technology-driven. I mean, we have this fantastic technology that costs nothing and allows you to set up platforms that you can use to get whatever you need within 3 minutes, within 300 meters from your home, right? Almost everything. And the third is a culture of sharing or the appreciation of the process utilities that I mentioned before. It's nice to meet other people and to come to terms with them. These three things together, scarcity, technology, and an appreciation of sharing, plus a disgust with what the suppliers of goods and services do to your pocketbook, right? And the wasteful nature and the environmentally dangerous nature and the energy waste and the carbon footprints and so on. This have all become part of the normal middle class vocabulary. 20 years ago, carbon footprint was not a word that you could put in print. Now it is everywhere. So the climate change debate, the environmental debate, also the debate on fair trade and working conditions in Bangladesh have contributed to a perceptible change in the micropolitics of consumption. And these are the factors of change that I see in the literature as being named as the drivers of the transition.
One of the paradoxes of these colloquia is that the more successful the discussion, the more need there is to cut it off. And so I'm going to, because of the hour, I'm going to be forced to close the formal portion of the discussion. I want to thank Mr. Offe for a tremendous presentation, and just say that you'll be around afterwards to talk further.
Yes.